Standardized testing. This presentation will answer the questions of what extent are standardized tests an effective way to measure student learning, and what are other ways teachers measure students' learning in their classroom. I chose this topic because all throughout school we took standardized tests, and while I excelled at them, I never really understood their purpose. A quote from Albert Einstein that I feel fits with the topic of standardized testing is, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." I believe that this quote is fitting for the topic of standardized testing, as it is saying that everyone has to take the same test, in this case, climbing a tree. The graphic is showing all these different types of animals, only one of which is built to climb trees. In our education courses, we have learned about the importance of differentiation, but then we measure the students' learning via standardized tests where everything is the same. I have conducted multiple interviews with parents and different school board officials to help answer these questions. For the principal's perspective, I interviewed Mrs. Lewick, the principal at WK Elementary School here in Winona. When asked if she felt that standardized tests were effective, she said that they are a measurement, but that she doesn't think they give us the whole picture, that some students do not test well but are strong students. She mentioned that she used to tutor students for the ACT test, and that some of her best students struggled because of the pressure and with being timed. She believes that the data to use provides accountability and some information, but that it's not without flaw. As for different ways to measure students' learnings, she said that both formal and informal assessments are good. Fluency is another piece of the puzzle, that writing can provide a wealth of information, and she believes that in order to have all the data, you need to have all the pieces, and that can be the tricky part for teachers because they need more time to look at all the data. For the school board perspective, I interviewed a retired school board president who was president for 10 years. When asked if he believed that standardized tests are an effective way to measure students' learning, he said that he believes that tests can be effective at measuring some students' learning, but that you need to be careful and recognize that tests don't measure everything. It can be very easy to focus on the things that are easy to measure at the expense of things that are not easy to measure. As a result, we can dramatically shortchange the full development of many students. Creativity, problem solving, organization, and the ability to learn on your own are things that are not easy to test for, but he would argue are probably the most important aspects of long-term success in the world. And that one of the things standardized tests are best at measuring at is how good someone is at taking tests. Measuring whether someone has learned the material in a way that will be retained in the future is a different matter. I asked if he believed the effectiveness of standardized tests varies from subject to subject, and he said definitely. Standardized tests is most effective in subject areas that tend to have simple, objective, multiple choice answers such as math and history, and have questions that can be answered quickly. Testing is less effective in English and science. He doesn't think that standardized tests do a good job measuring how well you can apply the scientific method to an unknown problem, for example. And they definitely aren't effective at subjects like music and art, which we use as a way to make sure the creative side of the brain isn't left out of the equation, but we could do a better job teaching creativity in the realm of problem solving as well. For the teacher perspective, I interviewed two different teachers, a high school teacher and an elementary teacher. The high school teacher was Mr. Dave Hoagland, who has been a teacher for 12 years. He said that standardized testing is a necessary evil in public education. There needs to be measured growth with every student, but unfortunately, a lot of districts are spending valuable teaching time teaching test strategies instead of core content. He said that these tests are reliable in measuring basic understanding of core subject content according to state standards, but that these tests do not measure critical thinking, problem-solving skills that you can learn by more project-based instruction. He said at their school, they are trying to implement cross-curricular learning where we tie in math, reading, and writing to every subject, even physical education. The elementary teacher I interviewed was Mrs. Nicole Tennant, who was a 6th grade ESL Spanish immersion teacher, and she has been teaching for 6 years. When asked about her belief of the effectiveness of standardized testing, She says that they are one important way to measure the growth of student learning, but obviously not the be-all end-all, that it is one data point to take into consideration, but other data points need to be available. So if a student does bomb the standardized test, we have something to fall back on and examine to see if the standardized test was a fluke or if it was accurate. When asked about other ways to measure students' learning in the classroom, she mentioned a specific example of something she does in her classroom with her English language learning students, that they utilize can-do statements and students monitor their learning can use can-do checklists. Teachers have the same ones and we would check off yes, with help, or no, based on each student's performance a few times a week or whatever was necessary for a given unit. She also said that she thinks different electronic programs that can track student progress and skills development are pretty cool. For the parent perspective, I spoke with Mrs. Lisa Krofchek, and she said that she thinks we need to have standardized tests to have a way to compare students' learning from year to year or different schools or whatever it may be, but that they should not be the only thing that we use because they do not measure creativity or problem-solving skills. And she mentioned that she doesn't like that there's more than one type of testing. At least at the school that her kids go to, they had MAP testing and WKCE testing, and that they should simplify it and just have one because standardized testing shouldn't be such a big focus. The conclusion that I came to after conducting these interviews and doing this research is that we do need standardized tests to be able to compare at least somewhat between different grades and different schools, but schools shouldn't be spending so much time on test-taking strategies and teaching to the test, and that schools should not be penalized for students doing bad on a test, because anyone can have a bad day, and that's why there might be a bad test score, as opposed to students not knowing the information. Here's a list of sources that I used as part of my research.